Marketing is a podcast for business owners and leaders, produced by my dad, Steve Davis, and his colleague at Talked About Marketing, David Olney, in which they explore marketing through the lens of their own 4 Ps: person, principles, problems, and perspicacity. Yes, you heard that correctly. Apart from their love of words, they really love helping people. So they hope this podcast will become a trusted companion on your journey in business.
David, it's 2010. In 2 or 3 words, describe Facebook to me.
A mystery, because at that point it wasn't accessible.
Okay, not quite 2 to 3 words, but it's now 2020. How would you describe it?
I think I'll pick another option, that is to tell you about my first experience. Would you like that?
And that's what we're on about in this episode, the book about careless people that thoughtful people should read.
Our 4 Ps. Number 1, person. The aim of life is self-development, to realise one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. Oscar Wilde.
In the person segment in this episode, we are diving into, I think, one of the most important books written this century. It's a critical book for people to read because all of us are connected to social media in some way, shape or form. It's by Sarah Wynne Williams, a Kiwi, who is an interesting human who moved through diplomatic circles and law and had her heart set on doing something noble with her life. And after a number of different roles, including the United Nations, she made to the holy grail, she thought at the time, of what was going to be so important for humanity. And I talk about Facebook. And her warts and all recounting of her time at that company is riveting reading. It's very well told, but by golly, it leaves you left me feeling quite winded on behalf of humanity afterwards. David, what was your journey like in reading this?
I was amazed that someone so idealistic could survive the environment so long, because she kept thinking, but eventually they'll get the point of how amazing Facebook could be and how much it could matter and how positive an impact it will have. And I'll just keep showing them what the good version of this looks like. So, 11 out of 10 points for tenacity and idealism, for surviving it as long as she did.
Well, that's true. Now, if I go back, because I ran the first ever social media marketing workshops in South Australia, and they were held towards the end of 2005. And I must say, over the next few heady years, we were all agog in the same way over these new tools emerging. We had MySpace at that point, YouTube, we had Facebook, etc. They gradually came online. There were some that came and went. I remember twerping at one point. There's all sorts that came and went, Foursquare. And we were putting ourselves out there and connecting and making amazing friendships. And I can't throw the first stone at Sarah Wynne Williams for drinking the Kool-Aid, because I think we all were. Were we just solidly naive, David, or do you think there was reason to share that naivety and optimism?
I think this is a really good opportunity for me to talk about my exposure to Facebook, which was later than a lot of people because, mobile phones weren't accessible and apps weren't accessible. So it was only in 2011 that I was able to get an iPhone with enough accessibility baked in to make it useful. And, of course, because of that, Facebook was then available. And I'd had so many students at university on Facebook for years before then, using it to stay in touch with people, to be connected. I had friends all over the world using it who would email me and go, "Oh, is this accessible for you yet?" I'm like, "Not yet." So I remember, literally getting my iPhone, making friends with it, and then loading Facebook and setting up an account. And suddenly from my contacts, it started populating with my former students and my friends overseas. And that initial buzz of being able to stay in touch with people who it was so nice to know they were doing well, or so nice to know I could easily send them a birthday greeting. That first, say, 2 years of it was lovely when it was about social connection and interacting in a way that seemed to be more self-guided than company manipulated.
Even though that mechanism was company manipulated, as we discover in the book, it was like Leonard Cohen said, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. It's like they had this gung-ho growth at all costs mentality, but they were still bringing some light to people's lives along the way, even though you were looking at it as opening up your social connections. They were looking at it as more minions that we can expose advertising to.
And I guess that's the thing, because I wasn't going to be affected by all the cute photos and the bright colours. I was really able to stay as someone who got useful data about people I cared about, and everything beyond that was of no interest.
From a person perspective then, I think many of us who'd been around through that period will have similar emotional memories of it being net good and opening up of doors. But it's interesting that you mentioned that findability, because there's a lovely track from the book where Sarah actually reflects on this, because Harvey, the man who was in charge of that, she had to look after it at some point, and here's what she had to say.
Facebook's business model depends on it conquering new territories, expanding exponentially. The growth team is in charge of forging those new frontiers, and like most frontiersmen, Harvey and his team play fast and loose. They're aggressive and quick to stake their claim, always looking for opportunities in the grey area created by the lack of regulation. Harvey's team is the group that came up with the idea of importing your contacts into Facebook, so Facebook could press non-users to join the service. In the beginning, they didn't ask permission to do this. You could tell Facebook, "Don't take my contacts." But then, when you open Messenger, they'd take them by default. And his team is instrumental in the development of the People You May Know tool, which is described by Mashable as Facebook's creepy as hell tool for its ability to make uncomfortable friend recommendations, such as when a sperm donor was recommended a biological child he had never met. It's a growth at all costs approach. To me, it seems like a very American thing. When Alexis de Tocqueville visited the US in the 19th century, he was on a rickety steamboat that hit a sandbar and capsized, and he nearly drowned. Afterwards, he found the manufacturers and asked them why they didn't make the vessel safer. They explained that technological innovation in America happened so quickly, there was no point. By the time they made the necessary changes, the boats would be obsolete anyway. Better just to take a chance on what you have. If some drown, no need to dwell, safe in the knowledge that something better is just around the corner. That cheerful recklessness combined with passivity, that forward motion without introspection, that's what Harvey's team has.
So the growth at all costs, it's there, but of course that lovely sting in the tail, or pernicious sting in the tail, is move fast and break things. And I suppose it's fun being on that roller coaster ride. It's when the track starts deviating and the bolts are loose, that's when we should get nervous, and that's what some of us didn't see coming.
No, I think, how could we see how much it was going to turn into a manipulative product? At the beginning, it was just this thing we could use in the way we wanted. Yeah, it was a bit pushy about wanting to get all your contacts, but also, how else were we going to see who was on it? We accepted some of the pushiness. But as time went on, it just became pushy about everything it wanted you to do, rather than you using Facebook to achieve the things you wanted to do. So it stopped being an empowerment or engagement tool, and instead just became a taskmaster designed to waste your time and destroy your mental health.
We probably do, to round off this person segment, reflect on this from the fact of how we held Mark Zuckerberg in high esteem, Elon Musk in the early days, others of that ilk. And now most of us look down at them as despicable, greedy, untrustworthy people. And there's something I think we all take away from this, because they were on a good thing. They were surfing a good wave which was impacting people's lives positively. And there's a point where they crossed the line. How do we maintain awareness of this point in our own worlds? We may not have a world-dominating enterprise, but we would have our own circles. Is there a way that most of us have that innately, a sense of when we're crossing the line, versus narcissistic humans who are the tech bros, who don't give a damn, who are just focused on the numbers that matter to them? I don't know. How would you wrap that in a bow?
As you've been talking about that, I've remembered a strange story from 2011 that I don't think I've remembered for a decade. And it's that a professor from Harvard gave a guest lecture in Adelaide, a famous professor called Robert Putnam, who works on the concept of social capital. And he gave his lecture on social capital, and that was nice, but he also gave a masterclass for people within the university who were interested in what he was working on. And I was one of the people that got invited to go. And it turned out that Robert was user number 25 on Facebook, when it was an experimental product run by a Harvard student. And Robert recounted the story of turning to Mark Zuckerberg, the very young Mark Zuckerberg, and going, "Mark, so what you're telling me is I'm going to be friends with someone called Hans in Germany, who I've met once. If I'm sick, is Hans going to make me soup and bring it to my door?" And Robert described how Mark just looked at him with no sense of comprehension at what Robert was trying to get across. Human connection is a deeper thing, and this tool is good for reconnection. But don't pretend these shallow connections have a big impact. And it doesn't really answer your question, but the fact that Zuckerberg missed these early cues about what he could have done with Facebook, kind of indicates he was just having fun coding.
And tends to marry with the image of him that's crafted through this book called Careless People.
Our 4 Ps. Number 2, principles. You can never be overdressed or overeducated. Oscar Wilde.
In the principles segment, we're going to continue reflecting on aspects of this book, Careless People, because one way or another, David and I would love you to read this book. We've actually also bought some paper-backed copies just in case, because at the moment, here's the interesting thing, and this gets to the heart of some of the principles we're about to be discussing. All the tech bros out there, including Mark Zuckerberg, wear the big badge on their chest that says free speech. They love free speech. They're up for free speech. They're bastions of free speech. So when Sarah Wynne Williams writes a book that's maybe not as flattering about you as possible, you would anticipate a free speech advocate would say, well, all's fair in love and war, let's let the market decide. Isn't that what you'd expect a free speech advocate to say?
It would be lovely if that was the case, but the bros are all hypocrites, so sadly no.
No. So they've gagged her from being able to promote her book. So this is why you're not hearing many interviews with Sarah Wynne Williams at the moment, and it's left up to the rest of us to carry the flame on her behalf, carry the torch. And that's why we've got some paper copies, because if they go the next level and get the book banned from being available on Audible or ebooks or wherever, we don't want people to lose access to this important storytelling into really the dominant communication system of the modern world. I think we all are invested in it. We all need to know what's happening. And it's shining the light in the shadowy workings of this behemoth is where we want to focus on here, because unbeknownst to many people, I didn't know this until I read this book, Facebook, as part of its growth, there was a rule of thumb, David, if I remember correctly, that they wanted to get into any country, or every country, at any price. So there's a lot of detail about wanting to get into China, and so developing systems just for China so that the Chinese government would be able to, whether directly or arm's length through a Chinese government company, analyse any content by Chinese citizens. If I remember that correctly, that's what they were offering, despite saying to the US Senate and other places that, no, we would never do that.
No, well, they said they wouldn't do it for the American system to give the state control over that much data, and yet they were happy to do it for China to get over 1 billion users.
It was basically they would at any cost to be in. And what was fascinating is, come the 2016 US presidential election, it seems that Facebook offered both the Trump campaign and the Hillary Clinton campaign an offer of assistance. Hillary Clinton's campaign turned them down, but Trump took them on board.
Over the course of the 10-hour flight to Lima, Elliot patiently explains to Mark all the ways that Facebook basically handed the election to Donald Trump. Facebook embedded staff in Trump's campaign team in San Antonio for months, alongside Trump campaign programmers, ad copywriters, media buyers, network engineers, and data scientists. A Trump operative named Brad Pascal ran the operation together with the embedded Facebook staff. And he basically invented a new way for a political campaign to shitpost its way to the White House, targeting voters with misinformation, inflammatory posts, and fundraising messages. Boz, who led the ads team, described it as the single best digital ad campaign I've ever seen from any advertiser, period. Elliot walks Mark through all the ways that Facebook and Pascal's combined team micro-targeted users and tweaked ads for maximum engagement, using data tools we designed for commercial advertisers. The way I understand it, Trump's campaign had amassed a database named Project Alamo, with profiles of over 220 million people in America. The campaign used Facebook's custom audiences from custom lists to match people in that database with their Facebook profiles. Then, Facebook's lookalike audiences algorithm found people on Facebook with common qualities that look like those of known Trump supporters. People likely to respond to Build a Wall got that sort of message. Mums worried about childcare got ads explaining that Trump wanted 100% tax-deductible childcare. Pascal's team also ran voter suppression campaigns. They were targeted at 3 different groups of Democrats: young women, white liberals who might like Bernie Sanders, and black voters. These voters got so-called dark posts, non-public posts that only they would see. They'd be invisible to researchers or anyone else looking at their feed. The idea was, feed them stuff that'll discourage them from voting for Hillary. One made for black audiences was a cartoon built around her 1996 soundbite that African Americans are super predators. In the end, black voters didn't turn out in the numbers that Democrats expected. In an election that came down to a small number of votes in key swing states, these things mattered. Mark quietly takes it all in.
A bit like your story in the first part of this episode where Zuckerberg looked at that professor and went, I don't get it.
Didn't understand what Robert was saying.
According to Sarah Wynne Williams' account, he didn't quite understand just how much Facebook was responsible for getting Trump in the first time, until it then started to dawn on him as the team unrelentingly showed all the data, all the statistics. It was like, so much so he even then started fantasizing about running for office himself. You still think he hasn't quite put that away?
No, I have a suspicion that that's what the big visit to Mar-a-Lago was after Trump won, to kind of say we're here to help. But the fact that Zuckerberg realised, I just made a president. I could be president. That's the implication of, Sarah Wynne Williams' book, that he didn't have a realisation of the enormity of what he'd done at any moral or practical level. He only had a realisation of the enormity as it could serve whatever childlike desire he had.
And that's the bleakest part of reading this book. The moral dimension is just absent all the way through. Did I miss it? Is it hidden under anywhere?
No. There's Sarah's idealism and not much else that's positive.
So from a principles perspective, what we have here is a company that all of us use in some way, shape or form, learning that basically it wins when the population is divided into splintered groups of people who hate each other. That's how Facebook makes money. If we were all happy, they'd still be making some money, but not making the killing. And I guess that's the thing to share in this principal segment. I'm not sure what's actionable about that other than if we want to sleep at night and not feel like we're part of it, we need some sort of rule of thumb to ask ourselves before we contribute content in this space. What would be a good rubric that we could use, David, so that at least if we're using this tool, we're not falling for the stuff they do, which is basically win at all costs. They just want eyeballs so they can expose people to advertising. There might be a slightly more pure way we can use it.
Well, the two that we keep coming back to as we talk about it is try and use Facebook as Sarah Wynne Williams imagined it could be used, as a place to connect people so they can help each other, so people have better lives. And I think the other one I thought of from so many years of teaching young adults, and that you resonated with from being a dad of two daughters, is think about whatever you put on Facebook. Would you want your 10-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 17-year-old doing the same thing? How would you feel, if a teenager posted the thing you just posted?
That might be where we leave the principal segment, because I think there's something useful in that little mental exercise that if my father or mother or son or daughter or whomever was going to do this too, have I been a great role model?
Our 4 Ps. Number 3, problems. I asked the question for the best reason possible. Simple curiosity. Oscar Wilde.
In the problem segment, this is one where quite possibly you might want to not listen out loud if you're at work, because we're about to play something from the book that's very hard to listen to. And I thought this sits nicely in the problem segment because it is a dilemma that we all have to face.
Since my time there in 2013, it went from having virtually no internet to everyone on mobile, totally skipping desktops. Facebook made deals with the local telecoms to preload phones with Facebook. And in many plans, time spent on Facebook wasn't counted towards your minutes. So in Myanmar, if you're on the internet, you're on Facebook. And because of this, Myanmar demonstrates better than anywhere the havoc Facebook can wreak when it's truly ubiquitous. The unthinkable happens. In late August, the military launches a campaign of atrocities against the Muslim population that the UN later describes as genocide and crimes against humanity. At least 10,000 people are murdered. The clinical language of the UN report on this somehow makes it all seem more horrible. Children were killed in front of their parents, and young girls were targeted for sexual violence. Rape and other forms of sexual violence were perpetrated on a massive scale. Sometimes, up to 40 women and girls were raped or gang raped together. Rapes were often in public spaces and in front of families and the community, maximizing humiliation and trauma. Mothers were gang raped in front of young children who were severely injured and in some instances killed. women and girls were systematically abducted, detained, and raped in military and police compounds, often amounting to sexual slavery. Victims were severely injured before and during rape, often marked by deep bites. They suffered serious injuries to reproductive organs, including from rape with knives and sticks. Many victims were killed or died from injuries. Others, men and women, were killed in arson attacks, burned to death in their own houses, in particular the elderly, persons with disabilities, and young children unable to escape. In some cases, people were forced into burning houses or locked in buildings set on fire. What the world will learn later is that the military had set up a massive operation, at least 700 people, to spread misinformation and hate on Facebook. This was revealed by a reporter named Paul Moser in the New York Times. Sources in the military's secret operation told him how they created and took over verified accounts that had huge followings, fan accounts for pop stars and celebrities, the Facebook page for a military hero, and used them to pump out false, inflammatory posts. Facebook's response to Moser? The company issued a statement saying it had found evidence that the messages were being intentionally spread by inauthentic accounts and took some down at the time. It did not investigate any link to the military at that point. The UN report on the human rights violations in Myanmar devotes over 20 pages to the critical role Facebook played in spreading hate.
The reason we included this in the problem segment is it leaves us all with a problem, with a dilemma. I feel bad about putting any money into the coffers of an entity like Facebook. So Dave and I were discussing it, talked about marketing. We'll now have a policy of being organic social media only. We won't be involved in funding or replacing funds of clients into any advertising within the Meta universe because, quite frankly, for us to do that means that we're benefiting from the sad history of pain and torture that lots of innocent people have paid the price for, and I just can't stomach it. I have to acknowledge that it's still a communication tool, and if we could use it within the straight and narrow with helpful, constructive messaging, at least in some small way, what we're putting out there, us and on behalf of our clients, is acting for the net good of society. We're finding this is our first way of reacting to Sarah Wynne Williams' book, and I'm sure it will evolve over time. But David, anything you'd add to this as people think through this themselves? How do you feel about contributing to this organisation which has been laid bare by Sarah's work?
Really, this is how we came up with our two rules of it's still too important to be able to communicate with people, and it is the tool that people have, and it's the tool that people are accustomed to. But let's use the tool in an ethical way that, we can be proud of the content and accept that we're using something that has been misused, but we're not misusing it. We can't have a pure version here, but we can certainly not contribute to it being worse. But at the end of the day, we need to use tools that can help people communicate with other people. And it's crazy to think that an ethical tool is going to pop up overnight. Once there's an ethical tool, we will try and find it. I think in 2023, Mastodon started to become a thing, and it was meant to be the ethical social media. And yet it just hasn't taken off in a way where we could say, put your social media posts there. We'd be doing you a disservice as your marketing advisors to recommend that.
Yeah, and same with Blue Sky at the moment.
Yeah.
Watch this space, and hopefully some food for thought for you as well.
Our 4 Ps. Number 4, perspicacity. The one duty we owe to history is to rewrite it. Oscar Wilde.
The book Careless People has a number of very deep personal stories that Sarah shares beyond the realms of Facebook. But this one bridges both worlds. It was, with her, of course, being from New Zealand, there's a harrowing retelling of a tale when earthquakes strike in Christchurch at a time when her sister was working in one of the news TV stations there in a building in Christchurch, which was at the centre of all this earthquake activity, and actually had a very close escape with some injury, I believe, from that natural disaster. But of course, phones to the newsroom all cut. There was a massive disruption to communication, and ultimately it was a Facebook message, a Facebook post, was her first way, Sarah's first way of getting a sign of hope that her sister was okay after this calamity, which made her think, yet again, here I am. There is much good about this company. And so from a perspicacious perspective, where we look at something and we reflect on how it would still be relevant over time, let's take you back, David, to those heady days, Christchurch, Facebook being that little source of accurate on-the-ground news. Are those days still part of its mix?
Well, I think the wonderful thing is that was people, including politicians like the Prime Minister at the time in New Zealand, using Facebook because enough cell phone towers were still working, people still had signal, their phones hadn't gone flat yet. At the very least, people could say, go here, there's water, go here, nothing's shaking anymore, go here, this empty space is being set up for food distribution and first aid. People will use the tool available if they know how to use it and it's available to them. So I think the wonderful thing is it shows where Facebook started. People made use of the platform. The platform at the time wasn't particularly manipulating them. And I think there'll be time and time again where people will use the platform well, as long as they ignore the company that created it.
My trust in the news from a natural disaster zone or a conflict zone is lower than it's ever been because of the easy ability to make fake content. So X, for example, I wouldn't trust anything I see on X because it's all those idiot manipulator embedded troops of Russians and all sorts of people who are just concocting fake rubbish to seize on any moment. Facebook would have its own share of that. So I think those days really have numbered, unless you happen to know that it's in your local Facebook group where you trust each other and know each other that you're getting some sort of feed.
Yeah, the fact that you would recognise, hey, that's the person from the pub, hey, that's the person from the cafe. I know that if they're putting a message up, that's a real person. So it works on the scale of bigger community than the people you know a lot about, but a community in which you recognise the face or the business or the place. So it tells us something about scale.
I think the thing I take away from this is no matter how much this technology like Facebook and our wide-eyed craziness in the early days thought we could have it all, we could have more, we could have thousands of people, it doesn't really escape the confines of what's the Dunbar number, which is that number of people, I think it's about 150, it's widely thought to be, that we can know well enough, like a group of monkeys, to be trusted and trustworthy. Anything we go beyond that is artificial. It's almost like if you move into space, it's a rarefied atmosphere where we need the contrivance of a whole lot of artificial systems to prop things up. That's like the intricate settings to have thousands of connections. You're never really going to meet these people. But it's the ones close to us that, like the professor talked about, Hans from Germany. If I'm sick, he can't bring me bread and soup, but the people around me are. And if anything, Careless People is a reminder to pull our attention away from Facebook and its growth at all costs and its fake promises of connection and say, you know what, do the hard, slow, sweaty work. Put that time into the relationships of people who are living closer, who can be contactable physically sooner, because ultimately that's where reality lies. That's what I get out of this, David.
Very much so. It's very much a case of look after your circle of trust. If people are outside your circle of trust, they're outside of it. And that tells you something really important.
Thank you for listening to Talking About Marketing. If you enjoyed it, please leave a rating or a review in your favourite podcast app. And if you found it helpful, please share it with others. Steve and David always welcome your comments and questions, so send them to podcast@talkedaboutmarketing.com. And finally, the last word to Oscar Wilde. There's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about.